A very warm welcome to all of you for the second episode in the series of conversation that we are having with Professor Dr. C. Raj Kumar. At the very outset, I want to express my deepest gratitude for the overwhelming response that we got for the first episode. It was truly heartening to receive messages from so many of you, not only in India, but across the globe, from all ages, where you talked about how inspired you felt by listening to the life and story of Professor Dr. C. Raj Kumar. I was truly blown away, and I want to thank all of you. And I want to ask Raj, before we begin, how did you feel when you saw the kind of response that your story and your journey received from everyone around?
Thank you, Pasana. It was a very truly humbling experience, I must say, because rarely I've had opportunity to talk about the things that I reflected last time when we had this conversation. And I think that, it's not so much that my life was unique, but I do believe that a lot of people around the world are looking to seek inspiration from many other people's lives. And this was just an opportunity for me to reflect about what has happened in my own journey. And I think people are very kind and generous in reflecting and expressing their own feelings about what they felt after listening to it. So I think it's quite a unique medium through which we are communicating. Normally, when one talks about these things, before the advent of this type of communication, one would write a book or an article and that type of modes of communication. But today, since younger people in particular are so much tuned to media-based engagement, this was a great opportunity for me to reflect about the journeys.
No, that's absolutely true, and I think so many resonated with the story. I mean, they could relate to it. Many saw themselves in the story that you've said, and one of the things that so many people wrote to us about was about your early days. Your early life in Kanyakumari, and we were told that please, we want to know more about it. We want to know more about what was it growing up in Kanyakumari in a middle class family, as you said. So could you share today for this episode some of the earliest memories of childhood from Kanyakumari?
Sure, I can. I think, my parents are working professionals. My father as you know, is a professor. My mother is a doctor. Because of the nature of their professional situation, believe it or not, I was in a boarding school as early as first standard.
You were in a boarding school?
Absolutely. And my father was working in Delhi and my mother was working back in South India. And I was literally, I stayed with my grandparents, but to ensure that I have good schooling, I was studying in a school called Kanyakumari Public School, located in Kanyakumari. And that was one of my earliest memories. And I think I must say that boarding school experiences could be at times traumatizing for young people, but it was absolutely amazing personally, because I could discover my own self early on. But I think the most important part of the experience was it gave me opportunity to think independently. It also made me more responsible, because there is most of the time when you are alone and not with family in a boarding school environment, while there are rules and regulations, a lot of internal responsibility gets built in. And for many students who have stayed in hostels in many parts of the world and in India would vouch for that. It can go wrong as well, but I was very fortunate. I have to say that at least at that time, for me, my visits over the weekends to my grandparents' house was very important. So that was the earliest childhood memory. And it was also important because that location was very inspiring. As you know, Kanyakumari is located in the southernmost tip of India. The conglomeration, in fact, my earliest memory of a beach was the conglomeration of Indian Ocean, Arabian Sea, and the Bay of Bengal. And right there is located the Vivekananda Rock. And the fact that Swami Vivekananda had swam across the ocean a bit and then did this, meditation there, and in his memory, a rock was built there. All of that was very inspiring for me personally. Those are fantastic memories.
Yeah.
I will treasure them.
How long were you in boarding school for?
So I was there for 2 years.
Class 1 and 2?
Yes. And after that, I moved to another city called Vellore. And my parents were working there. And it's a relatively smaller city compared to Chennai, for example. And I was studying in a school called Idis Cutter School in Vellore. And it was a huge change for me personally. And the change and adaptability was very welcoming, because I think at that age, one is very adaptable.
Yeah.
But at the same time, being with parents is something that one will always treasure. And that's what it was for me. But also, it's equally important to mention that my parents were working professionals, including my mother, who was a doctor, father who was a professor. That also means that they were balancing their work and their family in ways that I observed very closely even at that time. They made a lot of sacrifices, and that continues to inspire me personally.
I think this is something, and when you were talking, I was thinking about it, is that, given the pandemic and the fact that everybody was home for nearly about 2 years, what I have seen is a similar thing amongst our students. When they were away, they were yearning to come back to the campus and, lead independent lives. And when the moment was there that we have to go now, then again, this thing of leaving family and doing the thing all over again. So what it means to come and stay in a hostel, in a boarding school life, and then go back, and also understand how parents and others balance the work life and home life in that context. And then I believe you have a brother who's 6 years younger to you. So how did that equation, how was your relationship with your brother? How was it growing up with a younger sibling?
Because of the fact that my parents were very busy and themselves living their professional lives and doing best for us, we would spend a lot of time together. So, but then, like every other sibling relationship, I'm sure I have been, pretty naughty in terms of having regular fights with my younger brother. And we will, of course, mend ways quickly, because we also have to, only the two of us have to figure out things and play and do things together as well. But I think one of the things that I remember very, very fondly is that when we were very young, the earliest memories of us living together and experiencing a kind of a middle-class life was when both of us would be going to school. And we had this scooter. My father would be driving the scooter, and my mother will be sitting behind the scooter. And I will be sitting in the small space between the seat of my father and occupying a bit of seat in my mother's seat as well. And my brother will be standing in front. And four of us would be pretty much, this was our regular routine. And this actually is, and many years later, I would look at the kind of journey in terms of where we are today. And it was a very modest beginning. We were not poor at all. We were sufficiently provided for what our needs are. And of course, like a good middle-class family, education was always a priority. But the reality is, because we were conscious of the fact that my parents were doing every bit to give us the best opportunity, we would have a lot of time for us, me and my brother, doing things and figuring out things ourselves. We, of course, would fight with each other, but we will quickly be ready to play with each other as well. And I think I must say that my brother looked up to me a lot, and even today he does. And he's, of course, grown up to be a distinguished doctor in the United States. He went on to become a medical professional.
So he went on to become the medical professional, and you spoke about this actually in the last conversation that we had. And I must say that this is something that we got maximum amount of responses for. And many young, students, young aspirants who want to, follow their dreams and do things in life, they were really, really inspired by this part of the story, where you spoke about your love for cricket, where you spoke about, going with that, and following your passion, and then moving out of that and going for commerce, and your journey. And so many asked, have that pressure on us all the time to live up to the expectations of parents. So how did you navigate that space?
Yeah, listen, I mean, it's a tough time it's a tough decision making at any point of time. If you look at the ecosystem, at least in most parts of South India, there is a clear pecking order.
Yeah.
The best and the brightest of students are expected to become a doctor, and you will fulfill that dream. The second best are expected to become an engineer, and the others can do whatever they want. Nobody cares. And quite, rightly so. My mother was very keen that I become a doctor. But my father, who himself is a criminologist and has a strong social sciences background, he interestingly also wanted to become, or at least his parents wanted him to become a doctor at some point of time, which he didn't. So he would have also been pretty happy if I had become a doctor. But the good thing about, at least I was very fortunate, that my parents were ready to let me fulfill my own goals and aspirations. And growing up, one thing I was very clear. I wasn't at that time sure what I wanted to do, but I was always determined not to do medicine or engineering. And that, I think, defined my high school experience. So it was not so much the fact that I was under pressure. Fortunately, my parents were ready to give me that room. But my father always said something which even today I will always remember, which is that regardless of whatever you do, you should pursue it with the fullest spirit of excellence and to achieve the fullest potential in that pursuit. It almost doesn't matter what you study and what career you choose, but you need to make a mark in that career. And that always, triggered a sense of responsibility in me, because it almost transcended the idea of people individually choosing, certain disciplines and then deciding something is less important or inferior to the other. That defined me a lot when it comes to my own choices in my life.
So what defined you was the fact that your parents trusted you to make the right choice for yourself. And I think that, for those who are listening, and the fact that that responsibility was given to you to take, you were responsible about it. And I think that makes a huge difference. And the question that I want to ask you, though, is that, last interview you spoke about your love for cricket, and you were saying that your parents were okay with the choices you are making and the passions that you're following. But what about you? At what moment, and I'll come to you choosing to do commerce and other things later, but at what point you realized that this is not something that you would want to do professionally or take it up as a career? And were you okay? Were you at peace with this decision?
So let me be very clear with you on this. So, I was, of course, passionate about cricket, and my parents were indifferent about it. But my father and to some extent mother too, they were very supportive of it. But at the same time, my father also was very keen that I do other things. So I have a very interesting, now that you asked this question, I remember a very interesting story whereby, so my father is so keen on me learning music, for example, vocal music in particular. So what he did was, he organized this really renowned Carnatic musician, and this person would come to my home and teach me music.
So you did that?
I did that.
Okay.
And basically, the more appropriate thing to say is I started with that.
Okay.
So what this man would do is he will come with this harmonium, and I am supposed to be, it's typically at around 4 o'clock. That's actually a bad time, but I somehow, I agreed to it, or rather I didn't have a choice. So 4 p.m., this musician will come and we will start this harmonium, and I will do the initial training. And now I am absolutely not interested in this, but then obviously my father was keen. I started off with it. By 4:15 or 4:20, I am getting jittery because my friends have already started playing cricket downstairs. This is a flat, typical middle class apartment. And then by 4:20, I am telling this teacher that, I need to do something, so I'll come back in 20 minutes. And he is sitting there and practicing himself. I disappear. And then after 20 minutes, I'll come already sweating and, in a kind of a playful mood, come back and do another 5-10 minutes. Then I again disappear. And then I play cricket. And then he waits till 5:30 and he's pretty frustrated and he leaves. Now, of course, my father didn't know about this for a while. Much later, or rather a few months later, this teacher, this nice man, he told my father that, if you are very keen, I'm happy to teach you music, but not to your son. So that was one very, good example of I simply was not interested.
Yeah.
In fact, I have learned this, and now I am a father and I have 2 kids. And there are so many things that I would like even today that my children should do. But when I look back at my own time, my parents were generous about giving me the time and space to decide what I want to do. And cricket was really a passion. Now, all through the schooling years, that was it. I played so much cricket in my life that good part of my high school days, I only remember that. And my school gave me even privileges for that. I captained my school cricket team at the highest level when I reached there. I also played for the 3rd division team in the Madras United Club team as well. But very interestingly, the moment I entered college, just after high school, quite remarkably, I realized that this is not my calling. It's one thing to play sports as an extracurricular activity, even an active engagement for fitness and other things. But this is something that so I just stopped doing that. Sometimes I do regret about it, but I do think that that's why it's important for us to let go of our, or at least be ready to make mistakes or even change course, because the gut feeling that you have in making those choices will come to you and follow your gut.
Raj, an associated thing, and we spoke about it during the last conversation, that many of the choices that we make, particularly in the Indian context, are also determined a lot by not only parents, but relatives, extended families, what that cousin is doing and, how well that cousin is doing. So a lot of that inform the choices that we make. So when you decided, for instance, to follow to go into commerce stream, and one thing, of course, your parents and they're giving you the kind of space to make those choices, but were there other pressures from extended family, from relatives, from cousins, were there disappointments that not only you, but your parents had to deal with?
I'm sure they did, and they sheltered me a lot when it comes to those type of comments and observations made. As I said, it's clearly there are strong biases and prejudices against any other discipline, at least in my family. Most of my cousins are doctors and engineers, and at least at that time, I wouldn't have directly heard, but I know for sure that many of my relatives would have had a relatively dim opinion about my academic aspirations, because I wasn't pursuing, engineering or medicine, and I decided to pursue a BCom program. In fact, even there it was very interesting because I was always defying the ground rule in a way. So obviously the first defiance was not to become a medicine doctor or engineer. The second defiance was, after having done BCom, the next thing to do is to either become a chartered accountant or to pursue an MBA program. Then I defied that and ended up coming to do law. And then people began even asking questions like, if only I had to do law, why I need to come from Chennai to Delhi? I could have studied in Delhi, in Chennai itself, as it is, law was not considered as the most, let's say, attractive study or career option. But I think one thing is very clear. One should have an internal sense of faith and belief. By that time, it was all a personal decision and calling. And my parents were far more differential at that time. My father inspired me a lot. He's not a lawyer, but he is a criminologist and studied law, both LLB and LLM. And dining room conversations for a very long time was surrounding issues relating to crime and criminology and criminal justice. And in many ways, law was deeply embedded in those conversations. That definitely inspired me. And as I've said elsewhere, the freedom movement inspired me a lot. The fact that Mahatma Gandhi and Rajendra Prasad and Sardar Patel and Ambedkar, they were all lawyers. The foundations of Indian freedom movement were led by lawyers. And I felt that if there is a way by which one can contribute to the development of justice, and law could be a mechanism, a method, and indeed a study area and possibly a profession. But the defiance continued. After having studied law, the natural thing at that time to do is to join the legal profession and become a litigator, or join the corporate law firm and get into the firm. This was 1997. But again, I defied there and ended up doing something which none of my classmates would easily grapple with. I joined the National Human Rights Commission after completing my LLB degree and pursued a project on prison reforms. So in some ways, although not consciously to defy, I have been an outlier.
And I think in that way you followed your gut. And it did what it did on the sides, but you followed your gut. And that takes a lot of conviction. And I want to understand where that kind of conviction comes from at such a young age. We spoke about your family, we spoke about your parents and the kind of influence they had on you. But what about your friends? Because there is a tendency at that age to go where the peer is going. There we talk about peer pressure, for example. Everyone around you is doing something. So where does such a deep sense of conviction come from? And what about your friends? What kind of friendships you had? What kind of impact that they had on the kind of decisions that you are making?
So I must say that because of the fact that I moved a lot from city to city in the early days, as I said, I studied in Kanyakumari, and then in Nagarkoil briefly, and then in Vellore, and then Chennai, and even within Chennai, 3 different schools, and moving homes as well. It's a bit like how, children from army background, they don't have friends connected to a particular city or a school because they're moving. Our situation was not very different. All through my schooling, I was moving. But then once I reached Chennai in my high school, I had some fantastic friends there. But I must say that I never had too many friends. I always believed in having a fewer friends with stronger and deeper relationship. I'm not the guy who is used to having too many superfluous relationships. I value these relationships a lot, and it takes a lot of effort in terms of spending and knowing each other and building those relationships. In my school, I had some very good friends. Some of them I'm in touch with. School is still a very far away time. We do meet occasionally. One of my very dear friends, it's very interesting. Sometimes you know them for a very long time, but they come back into a new avatar in your profession. One of my friends, I have got connected with him. His name is Maheshwaran. He's in Sydney, in Australia, is doing very well. And I got to meet him in Australia after many, many years. There are people, but I must say I'm more connected with my college friends. One of the friends who also stayed through school and college is somebody who you all might know is a movie actor by name Surya. He studied in my own school and college, and we're very dear friends, and he is somebody whom I'm in touch with a lot. But there's another friend of mine, Robin Jacob, whom I'm in touch with in college, and there is now a group, WhatsApp group, which we meet. But in terms of professional aspiration and how that led me to my journeys, I'll say that it has a lot got to do with both my parents on the one hand and my teachers on the other. My decision to pursue whatever I ended up doing was largely due to my teachers, in particular, three of my teachers in Delhi University, Professor M.P. Singh, Professor B.B. Pandey, and Professor Parmanand Singh, who is no more. These three, inspired me so much to believe in the law and to focus on public law in particular, and to help me pursue my aspirations. In fact, so much so that I became rather indifferent to the world of litigation, which is the classic legal profession, or for that matter, the world of law firms, which is transactional and corporate law. Although I must say in 1997, not many law firms were actually in existence. It was almost by inevitable that my inclination was towards research and something different from what almost every other classmate was doing.
Two questions that come to my mind. One is still continuing with the friends thread, and you said that you have a WhatsApp group, but are you on Facebook? Are you on Instagram? Do you do these platforms? That is one.
Yeah.
And two is, when you were, as you said, you were pursuing your gut, you were going by your convictions. What was the thought process? You thought, I will do this and see what happens? Or there was at least some kind of plan in your mind that, step A, step B, step C. What were you thinking? But that later. First, I want to know the Facebook,
So
Instagram.
I am consciously out of social media. I am not on Facebook. I am not on Twitter. My communication office here at the university has been putting a lot of pressure on me to be on Facebook and Twitter and be actively engaged in those conversations. There are a lot of people, including a very dear friend and mentor, Dr. Shashi Tharoor, has also been asking me to be on Twitter. But I've consciously taken a decision that I simply won't be part of it for a number of reasons. First of all, I do believe that the role and responsibility of me as leading this institution is a significant amount of work. I typically work over 16 hours or more a day, 7 days a week. I simply don't have the luxury of time to be able to actively engage in social media platforms. Second, I think I personally value my voice a lot. I want to be able to influence and impact through my voice. I don't want to have somebody handle my social media platforms, write things on my behalf. And I simply don't want to outsource my opinion, even if there are very good professionals in our university who can do that. There is a very good role that social media plays for generating information and sharing news, but we need to be very conscious that responsible use of such platforms can only do good. Otherwise, you end up trivializing, but more importantly, creating a kind of a divisive society in which news gets misquoted. This can be potentially dangerous. You remember, since you are from Assam, I don't know whether you remember, I think some years ago, an inaccurate information about something related to Northeastern students were circulated, and that resulted in violence committed against certain individuals. And the unfortunate part of the social media is, once you put that information out in public domain, the damage control becomes even more difficult. So in a way, there has to be a more discussion and debate surrounding how to use social media.
I asked, along with the question on social media, is going back to the journey that we are trying to trace. Was there a plan? Going back to the days of commerce and then deciding to do law and joining the National Human Rights Commission for a project. Was there ever a thought in your head that this is step A, this is step B, and this will be step C? Or you were saying, okay, this is step A, I'm doing this, and then I will see where it goes from here?
Well, thank you very much, Upasana, for that question. I think it's a very important question. I did not have a plan. And I think, I worry about young people having too many plans.
Too many plans.
In fact, so let me say this. When I was a student at Delhi University, I loved what I was doing. I was enjoying the study of law. I was actively participant in numerous activities. I was heading the Constitutional Law Society. I was helping create an environmental law society. We established an advanced constitutional litigation course. We did environmental projects. We did wildlife protection projects. I mean, I was just active. But one thing was very clear, that I was very inquisitive and I was restless. I was just wanted to do many things. But I was never doing those things with a larger objective in mind. And I'm not saying for all those people who plan to do things for that objective is bad, but there is a pernicious practice that has developed in more recent times. And I'm seeing that with a lot of young people, including possibly our own students, which is that I ended up doing these things all through my life. And I never had a CV for me. For the first time I prepared a CV was when I was applying for the Rhodes Scholarship. And then I was thinking as to what all I've done in my life, and I started putting it. It ran into several pages. And I realized that I've done a lot. And today I'm seeing a situation where people are essentially doing things to have that bullet point in their CV. And this is worrying for me because they don't have any passion or commitment to the cause that they're espousing. They don't have even possibly interest in what they are doing. All they are doing is to be part of an instrumental functional mechanism whereby whatever activity that they're doing is with a very specific, limited, myopic objective to get a result, which could be admission to a university or a job or a talking point in an interview. That's very sad. That in many ways undermines the internal agency that all of us have in pursuing our dreams and aspirations. And I do want to tell our students and other young people that they should simply stop doing that. Because obviously, in that process, you have lost your own personal imagination and aspiration. Yeah. But more importantly, most of the time in life, you are going to end up thinking that you really have not done much because everything was a bullet point in a CV that you were concocting and preparing, and you've really not lived your own dreams. It's almost like living somebody else's life. And so have an element of surprise. Allow yourself to get lost in the myriad of opportunities out there, and then you will discover where your calling is. Many a time, students come to me to ask about how do you find their calling. The answer is that if you allow yourself to discover that possibility, you will find the calling. And that calling may come when you're in school, when you're in college, much later, even when you're in jobs. So, in a way, I want to say that the prevailing practice of defining and determining your life's activities through a bullet point in the CV is the worst thing that you can do for yourself.
Raj, I really want to highlight this part of the conversation. And I hope all the young people who have tuned in, including parents and guardians, pay attention to this part of the conversation specifically, because, we interact with students every day and everyone is building a CV. Yeah. What you spoke about, that you sat down when you were applying for the Rhodes Scholarship and wrote down the things you have done, put it together. But here the effort is to build a CV. So you build a CV because, A would ask for that. So you're not giving yourself, and that's so beautifully put, what you've said, that your calling will come if you give yourself that space
and
to
participate in
reflect on
activities
that
and pursue your
for the
passion.
joy of it.
Absolutely.
And not because, I remember when, various activities that we were doing in campus many times, and I'm sure it is not a phenomenon unique to our students, it happens across all universities. You ask about something and the first question is, do we get a certificate for this?
No.
Because
what a pity.
it is, it is.
And I feel very, very, frustrated when I hear that.
Yeah.
And most of the time I discourage people to do it. It's almost like you have no reason to actually come and be part of that exercise, but the instrumentality attached to it, the outcome attached to it is the only reason why you want to pursue that activity. Doing something that you are interested in is more important than doing many things.
That is beautifully put. And I have one more question, actually a couple of more questions, but one question that I have been meaning to ask you while we are talking about all of this, that we spoke about the passion, we spoke about convictions, we spoke about following the dreams, allowing yourself to have that sense of calling to come to you at some point or the other. But in all of this, did you bunk classes? In all of this, did you do things in college that you may not have to, if you don't want to, you don't have to mention all of this. But what was it? What was that part of life? Because college life, school life is much more than the academic pursuits that one does. So what was that part of your life like?
So, I'm afraid, Upasana, I have to disappoint you. My life has been pretty boring.
I am very disappointed.
It's not at all, a significant defiance of anything. I'm a relatively, law-abiding citizen. I have been conforming to rules and regulations. But and I also went to, a Jesuit institution, both in terms of my school and college. And so where discipline is important. In fact, when in my college, Loyola College, people used to call it as slaves of Loyola because Loyola students are expected to be very much adherence to rules and regulations and pretty subdued in that sense. The only radical thing I did was not to become a doctor or engineer, which was pretty radical in Chennai context.
I know.
In college, I definitely did miss classes. The word bunking sounds, I'm a bit embarrassed to use the word bunking, but we would hang out and go for movies. In fact, I have great memories of those times in college where we make it a point to not attend classes in the afternoon and end up going for movies and other things that we enjoyed doing as friends. And those were great memories.
One more question on that note. I've been working with you for nearly 10 years now, and so many of us who have worked closely with you, we've not seen you get angry, lose your cool. You've always, calm and collected. You get the work done, but you are not overtly excited and emotional and, screaming and shouting around. You're quite calm and collected. Has it always been like this? Did you get into fights in college?
No. In fact, in my early childhood, I was considered more naughty and I would probably be engaged in fights like a errant child. But most parts of my high school and college, I was pretty much like that. And I have to say that a lot of patience in me, I owe it to my mother. She's a very, very, calm and composed person. And that deeply inspired me, and those values were very much part of my own upbringing. But I have to confess, Upasana, that it's not easy to be in that situation all the time, particularly when we are doing, things that require big decision making. That's the decisions impacting a lot more people, and serious stakeholders are involved, and different constituencies involved. But so one of the things that I've learned through this process is that there's no point in losing your own temper. It does not help you to achieve anything. But what is important is that to be able to inspire adequate number of people to help them achieve and give their fullest and their best. And I do very strongly believe that if you are able to inculcate that in others, you will be able to get more out of your colleagues, your faculty, your students and staff.
Raj, as we are talking about, the kind of childhood that you had, and the kind of challenges, dreams that you had, when you see your children today, do you see that they are growing up differently than you did? I'm not only talking about in terms of the socio-economic status, but in terms of, their dreams, their aspirations, how you relate to them, and, how you see them growing up. Do you see sometimes do you see reflections of your own childhood, or do you think that the childhood they have is vastly different than yours?
Thank you for that question, Pasna. I do believe that my brother and I were part of a generation where the candid conversations that could happen with parents were rather limited. And even if it happened quite strongly, it was more with the mother than the father. And there was a well-established norm of social hierarchy when it comes to the relationship between parents and children. And this was part of multiple generations, you can say. And I think a tectonic shift has happened in that relationship, at least in the last couple of decades. My children belong to that generation which epitomizes what Rabindranath Tagore said, where the mind is without fear and the head is held high. There are very little, if at all, aspects where they are reluctant to talk about it. They are very open. They're quite candid when it comes to reacting, responding, speaking up. And I think that's a very big development. And I do believe that that's going to be the future that will help and strengthen the future of our democracy and also our society.
Well, thank you. Yes, when the head is held high and mind is without fear. With that note, I have a final question for you. Any, parting thoughts, from this conversation, any word of advice, any thought that you want to leave the audience who are watching us with, based on the conversation that we had today?
Well, all I can say is that there's one thing that I've learned all through my, I'm 47, so in my limited life, I would say is that, if you work hard and pursue your dreams, there is nothing that you cannot achieve. And my life and my family background is pretty ordinary. And if people like me from relatively ordinary and humble backgrounds, including my parents, who themselves had ordinary and humble backgrounds, can do what we ended up doing, I don't think anything should stop from people who want to aspire to do whatever they like. In fact, if there is one thing that we have learned through this process is that our students in particular and our young people should not hesitate to dream big. And they need to be conscious of those dreams, but along with dreaming big, they need to also recognize that they have a larger role and responsibility towards society. I do get worried about the fact that a lot of what many people end up thinking today is much more myopic in terms of their personal achievements and their personal goals and their personal aspirations, which is not entirely wrong. But because of the nature of education that they have received, it's equally important for them to think about how they can contribute to the society at large. And by the way, contribution society doesn't mean they all have to join an NGO. There are so many ways by which you can contribute to society, even while working in a multinational corporation. One should not be dogmatic about where one works, but regardless of where one works, one should be conscious of how they can make an impact to the society at large and to the larger community in particular. Because the education that we all receive, I am very convinced, is a privilege. A large number of people simply don't have it. In fact, Upasana, I'm sure you know this, that in the last 2 years, during the pandemic, UNESCO has estimated that 1.5 billion people have been removed out of education. a generation is going to be affected because of this. That means those of us who receive education, be it in good schools and colleges and universities, we have a larger responsibility, and that responsibility cannot be limited to our own personal success and our own personal financial goals and aspirations. It has to be inevitably taking into account how we can contribute to change in society. And that's something which I would strongly exhort the youth of India and the world to keep in mind.
Thank you, Raj. Thank you for saying that. And with that truly inspiring thought, we will bring today's conversation to a close. I do hope that you can spare some time in the future, and we can have many more such conversations that would not only inspire others, but also there is so much to learn from somebody else's journey who has had such an incredible journey like that of yours. And we're truly grateful for the time that you have given us today, and we will do this again sometime soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pastor. It's a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you. Thank you.